Hi, and welcome to Thone's Translation Nibbles. We're going to be starting nibble number 1, but I want to sort of explain the format's going to be a little different for these video versions than for the printed version, and I'll explain how and why, and we will get right to it. The net result of this is that there may not be a video version for every single day of the week because there are 7 different scripture sections we're going to be working with, and there'll be in the written version there is a separate, there's an overall one and then a separate one for each verse involved. And so although they're only looking at 7 small sections of scripture, it may be that there will be at least 3 days worth of material in those, and in one of them at least there would be 5 days worth. So just trying to explain that, and it'll make sense, I think, once we get started. And so today we're going to be doing Thone's Translation Nibbles 1 and 1A and 1B, and that allows us to look at the entirety of the analysis of this particular section of scripture in one video rather than bits and pieces as we go along. So we're going to be looking today at the book of John, the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. I've deliberately tried to make this all in scriptures that most people who read their Bible with any regularity at all will be familiar with. And what we're looking at really is the difference in what different translations say in those scriptures, to understand both the rights and the wrongs, also the don't cares, and in a couple of cases the what is that? So we will begin at this point. So we're doing John 1, verses 1 and 2. I want to point out a few characteristics here of Bible translations, which we won't be going over after this first lesson. I've chosen 11 generally mainstream Bibles and 3 more controversial Bibles in these studies. And for that, there are several pages in the paper part involved in doing it that way, and so these will be longer in extent, time-wise, than the normal nibbles, which are basically 1 page. We're going to be completing this series in a few weeks, 2 weeks, more than 2 weeks, maybe right at 3 weeks or thereabouts, at which time we will return to the KJV and be studying in the way we have always been studying before, the book of James. There are mainly 2 different groups of translations that are thought to be the most reliable, let's say, or the most generally accepted. There's the so-called majority text, and there's the minority text. Now, the majority text means that it is translated from the largest number of Greek fragments which generally agree with each other. So they, went searching here, there, and everywhere in the Middle East and in Europe and so on for the oldest bits of translation, and then they read those and then they say, okay, these 2 agree, so we'll include all the material in this, and so on. And so there's There's a process, and it's called majority text because it has the largest number of the fragments accepted as the things that they're going to be translating. The minority text is a little different in that it's translated from those Greek fragments believed to be the oldest at the time of translation. And so that's saying, no, we'll go back to those things which were written before there was any opportunity to change, and so on. And of course, both of them include a lot of the same fragments. It's just the weight that the minority text has on those older ones versus the weight of the count them, how many numbers that the majority text has. And you will find that this makes difference in some places and very little difference in others. Another difference between these various translations is that all of the majority text translations and a few of the minority text translations are word-for-word translations. And that is what we think about, if we took a foreign language in high school or something, is that you translate word for word. And that's the most accurate way from the point of view of trying to duplicate the spirit of the actuality of what's going on, let's say. However, some of the more popular minority text translations are translated thought by thought or concept by concept. And so you get not this chronological progression of words, but rather you read it, the translator read it in the Greek and then put together the best 3 or 4 sentences, whatever, that in English gives, makes sense. And this is also sometimes called concept by concept. What we see is that the word order may vary considerably between these methods, because the word-by-word translations tend to keep the same word order as the Greek, whereas the thought-by-thought translations tend to have more English-like word order because the person is reading in Greek and then spitting out English on a thought-by-thought basis rather than by a word-by-word basis. So we would expect to see word order variations in this. And finally, the spelling and the alphabet is inconsistent in the 3 earliest translations. Let me say the 4 earliest, thinking about it. Note, for example, in the Geneva Bible, the use of what we call the letter F as it is also used. It's used as an F, but it's also used as an S or a double S. And in some cases, also, U and V are interchangeable. So when you say unto, unto today, UNTO, it may say VNTO in these older translations. And I'm showing you the actual exact translation I have. For some of these, I have exact copies of what it looked like in the Bible. And so I have put those in this list. When we get to comparing, however, I will change the spelling to agree with common spelling, so we can just go down a column or something and say, in the beginning, beginning, you know, they all agree. And finally, and we're going to be given, you know, so we're going to have a list of majority texts first, and then a list of minority texts. And in the majority text, we need to also, some of them also have, some of the early ones have bits and pieces of the Latin Vulgate Bible that have been spliced in because they were lacking something, let's say. And so, and some are, and most people would say this was polluted by the Latin Vulgate, and then some of them are unpolluted, and some of them are polluted. Okay, so here we go. The first we are considering is the King James Version as most people think about it. That is, there's been lots of revisions in the King James Bible, but the one which sort of is the one that most Bibles that you would carry around with you is the 1873 so-called the Oxford Paragraph Version. This is the first time that instead of this verse, the King James got paragraphs. They still have all the verse numbers and everything, but they have a paragraph to sort of separate. You know, we start here and then we get to here and then we're changing subject, then we're going on to a new paragraph, and so on. And this is clearly a modern English publication. And so it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. Okay. Now we plunge back into the ancient ones. And that's sort of where we're comparing to, is the sort of the highly respected Oxford Paragraph Version of the King James Bible. The Wycliffe Bible. Now this is an old one, and it's published in 1382 by John Wycliffe, and it is clearly written in Middle English. And if you don't know what Middle English looks like, some of it looks pretty familiar, and other parts look like, what is that? And in fact, a knowledge of German is occasionally useful in reading the Wycliffe Bible. The Tyndale Bible, which is an early modern English, published between 1522 and 1535. I think it was published. He was Tyndale was being chased all over the place to try to arrest him and kill him for putting a Bible into the vernacular, and so you know, he published it sort of book at a time over that 13-year, 14-year period. The Geneva Bible, and this is early modern English, published in 1560, and it's a, you know, one of the great achievements really at that period of time. It does have a couple of things that you might look out for. The Geneva Bible has all the Apocrypha in it also. The Book of Tobit and the Book of, all those books which were not accepted by the church they maybe originally accepted by some people and then eventually they got weeded out. And that was published 1560. Then here comes sort of the one that breaks away, the the original King James Bible. It's early modern English, and it was published in 1611. And it is surprisingly similar to most other King James Bibles that have come along since then, except for it has all kinds of issues with spelling. There was no standard spelling at that time, and so you see some words that you have to work on to get to recognize. And then the final majority text is the New King James. It was published originally in 1982. It is modern English, and was really the book that's extremely similar to all the other King James Bibles, except that it uses, when there were antiquated words there, like the ye's and the these and the thous, it changes them to the way we would say it in modern times. And, you know, it is, if you believe the King James, you're not going to have a problem with believing the New King James either. It's really just it's a reading which with patched up spelling and vocabulary. Okay, and that was first published in 1982. Now the minority texts that we're going to be studying. The NIV, the New International Version, was published originally in 1973, and it is other than the King James Bible, it is, I think, the most celebrated Bible in the English language. Its minority text, the NLT, the New Living Testament, or the New Living Translation. It's modern English and it's published in 1996. And it is fairly similar to the New International Version in truth, but it has a little more fluid writing of some of the sections. The New American Standard, in NASB, it's modern English, and it's been published between 1960 and 2020. So it's the newest, really, of these we're going to be looking at. The 2020, we will be looking at the 2020 edition, and it is generally thought to be the most authentic translation, in that its vocabulary is very precisely translated from the Greek. And so it's the most literal translation, if you want to look at it that way. The CSB, the Christian Standard Bible, it's modern English. It's published in 2017. And it is, again, a minority text. And here's an up-and-coming one. The ESV, the English Standard Version. It's in modern English. It was published originally in 2001 and revised last in 2016. It is, I enjoy reading the ESV quite personally. It has a little bit more of a rhythm to it as you read it, and you can enjoy the act of reading. And then finally, the three controversial translations for comparison. There is the MSG, which is the Message Bible. It was translated by a single man, a retired Presbyterian preacher, and it is very controversial. It was intended to be a Bible translation in language that anybody could read, that you didn't have to be well educated to read it or anything. And I don't know. We'll talk about that when we get to some examples of that, I guess. There's the Amplified Bible, and it is a I don't know. I don't think there's anything wrong with the Amplified Bible. It's not like it leads you down a wrong path, but it must be incredibly difficult to preach from the Amplified Bible. Because let me just read our section here. In the beginning, parenthesis, before all time, was the Word, parenthesis, Christ, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God Himself, period. He was, parenthesis, continually existing in the beginning, parenthesis, co-eternally with God. So having in 2 verses 4 sets of parentheses to explain what was meant by the thing that came just before would drive you crazy if you were trying to preach a smooth sermon based on this, because it's continually defining everything. And then there is probably the most controversial of them all, the Passion Translation. And it says, in the beginning, the living expression was already there, and their living expression was with God, yet fully God. They were together, face to face, in the very beginning. I don't think you would likely even recognize that if you were used to what most other Bibles say about these 2 verses. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in today's lesson. So that's where we are. And so now we're going to go into the analysis of the first verse, John 1:1. Now, I want to point out that these are my opinions, not proven facts. If you do not agree, please message me or comment or something. This is John 1:1. And we're going, looking down the page, what we find is that 10 of the 14 translations are essentially identical. The biggest difference is whether or not the word "word" should be capitalized or not. I mean, literally, that's the only difference. This is, in fact, true of all the majority text translations and all but the NLT of the minority text translations. It is nearly identical, and the NLT is nearly identical with the emphasis of already existed added. I personally have no issue with that, because it is in agreement with many other statements in the Scriptures, and it's added for emphasis. And so that's a bit of a editorial thing, but it just reminds you that that God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit all existed before the beginning of time. Now that translation says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." And that's pretty much standard. I mean, there's, like I say, some of them the word is capitalized, and some of them the word is not capitalized. The more modern the translations, the more likely it is to be capitalized, because that's the way our English language has moved since then. The King James 1611 has an ampersand in place of the "and," but they were, you know, that was made it easier for them who were hand setting the type to print the Bible, and there were, and everything else is just the same. Let's see. Okay, the King James, the original King, the King James. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Wycliffe says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was at God, and God was the Word." And so they're very, very, very similar. All of those are. And the New Living Testament, the NLT, says, I guess the New Living Translation, "In the beginning the Word already existed. The Word was with God, and the Word was God." So, as I said, it just in more emphatic there. Then we get to the three more non-traditional ones that the MSG, the Message Bible, uses a extremely confusing English here. It says, "The Word was first, comma, the Word present to God, comma, God present to the Word, period. The Word was God." I'm not even sure that's good English grammar. The Word was first is fine, but the Word presented, the Word present to God, God present to the Word. There's a kind of a strange lack of verbs there, and the Word was God makes sense. So it's bothersome to me, since one of the stated purposes by the translator is to provide a translation that modern people can understand. And I think I'm a modern person, and if that was the only exposure I had to this phrase, this chunk, I wouldn't have any idea what that meant. Okay, the Amplified Translation. It's understandable, seems to be imparting the same thoughts as the others, more traditional translations, seems to be more at home as footnotes in a study Bible than as a translation in its own right. That's my opinion. It provides two parenthetical definitions in its text. Thus, it would be a difficult translation to preach from because it has little or no interesting rhythms or phrases or anything. It's jerky, da 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 da, and then an explanation of da, da 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 da, and an explanation of da. That isn't a great thing to preach from or to read for pleasure or any of those things. It to me is like a translation which sort of makes sense, but then all these things which everybody else uses footnotes for, and yet they put it right in the text. The TPT translation, the Passion Translation, uses the phrase "the living expression" in place of either the Word or Christ. Is rather intentionally dramatic, which is not unexpected, since it seems to be aimed at relatively strongly apostolic, charismatic Christian denominations. This was written mainly, it's funny, I go to a church named Bethel, but not this church. There's a large church, mega church named Bethel, and they are known for, let's say, New Age kind of thought. And so intentionally dramatic is what you would expect to emphasize the hyper-spirituality. I also must say it has been removed from at least one Bible repository online as being not a translation at all, but more of a trendy paraphrase. And you know, it's claimed to be a translation, but probably not. So that completes the analysis of John 1:1 for these different Bibles. And we'll go on to 1:2, which is much shorter right now. Again, warning you, these are my opinions, not proven facts. Please let me know if you don't agree, by whatever method is available to you. Similarly to verse 1, all 11 of the majority and minority texts are in similar agreement. They say either he was in the beginning with God, or he was with God in the beginning. You know, this irrelevant word order is the only difference in those 11 of the 14 translations. So that sort of says that everybody's on the same page there. As for the three others, they also indicate the eternal relationships between God and the Father and God the Son. The Message Bible uses the phrase readiness from day one. That is, the Son was ready from day one to come to earth because of his Father's plan. The Amplified says they are eternally with God. And that, again, is the main point of this, being in the beginning with God. Co-eternally, that is, even before the beginning, right? And the TPT says face-to-face in the very beginning. So that, again, gives you a dramatic picture of here's God the Father and here's God the Son, and they're face-to-face in the beginning. So I guess I can't complain about those. It's just that everybody else seems to think that it's sufficient to say what the other 11 translations do say. But I'm saying there isn't any misinformation in verse 2. So that completes this first Nibble 1, 1A, and 1B. And probably in 2 days there will be a Nibble. There is a Nibble 2 already. A Nibble 2A will be written tomorrow, and a Nibble 2B will be written the next day. And that will be on, and then the video, been videoed. This will be on Luke 2, verses 19 and 20, which is, you know, this is having to do with Mary and the shepherds just after the birth of Jesus. And again, a quite interesting section. As I say, I've tried to pick out sections which many people would probably know by heart. You know, this is about Mary, but Mary kept all these things and pondered them in her heart, and the shepherds returned, and so on. But that's the way it's going to go. And then when this is done with these 7 different sections of translation, we'll jump back to do the Book of James. And if you like this kind of analysis, let me know so that from time to time we can go back and look at something that's a little more seminary-ish, you know, the kinds of things that you would learn in a seminary rather than the kinds of things that you would learn from a pulpit. The traditional nibbles that I've been doing are really little very many sermons that analyze the scriptures as they would be taught and explained in a sermon kind of environment. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and I say let me know one way or another, and we'll talk to you next time.